Hello chess fans, I'm Sam Copeland and I'm a national master on the content team here at Chess.com. I'm here today to show you an amazing computer chess game played between Stoofvlees and Stockfish in the Chess.com Computer Championship number 15. In this game, Stockfish plays like the great Paul Morphy, gambiting a pawn in the opening and following up with an amazing attack that delivers checkmate in only 24 moves, nearly unheard of in an engine tournament. The game begins with a book move from the tournament, B3, the Nimzo-Larsen attack. This is also one of Hikaru Nakamura's favorite opening moves. In fact, on Chess.com, it is his best scoring opening move. After B3, white obviously intends bishop B2 with pressure on the dark squares in the middle of the board. Therefore, E5 from Stockfish is the most challenging response. It says, I know you're trying to attack the dark squares in the center of the board, and I'm still going to build my pawn center there. Come and get me. After pawn to E5, we see bishop B2 and knight C6. I think C4 here is already inaccurate. Basically, white is playing a B6 Sicilian, and the B6 Sicilian is the worst of the Sicilians. Even the extra move with the white pieces is not going to redeem it. Instead, in this position, grandmasters like Hikaru like to play pawn to E3. Now, the kind of main line here and a semi-famous line is knight to F6, bishop to B5, threatening to trade on C6 and win E5. Bishop D6 is an awkward defensive E5, but it does develop the bishop, and knight to A3 moves the knight to the edge of the board to get it to C4, pressuring D6 and E5. The most popular move here is the irrational move knight to A5, also moving to the edge of the board to stop white from putting the knight on C4. This position is extremely weird, very irrational, but it is actually about balanced. Instead, in the game after C4, we see a very strong idea from Stockfish to put pressure on white. That is the move knight G to E7. For a human player, this is very unintuitive. Why would I want to block in the bishop here on F8? The idea turns out to be to break D5 as soon as possible, even if you have to sacrifice the pawn on E5 to do so. In this case, the knight is actually going to be well placed on E7 because sometimes it needs to get to C6 to maintain compensation. The game continues knight F3 and Stockfish follows through with the idea of the sacrifice, pawn to D5. Now, white can either accept the pawn on E5 right away or after exchanging on D5. If you accept right away, we see why the knight needs access to C6. We get a trade here, and after the bishop takes back, first you play D4 when the pawn is really strong and it cuts off the bishop's retreat. After D4, basically any move is going to be met by knight C6. The knight is really strong here, putting pressure on the bishop and defending this pawn. Basically, in all cases, black is going to get really good counterplay. The bishops develop quickly, and the heavy pieces rapidly reach the center of the board and exert a lot of pressure on the white position. In the game, we do see the trade on D5 first, and then the acceptance of the gambited pawn. So, C takes D5, knight takes D5, knight takes E5, knight takes, bishop takes, and once again, Stockfish shows a real disdain for this bishop. Queen to E7. For the second time, a piece is put on the E7 square, blocking in the bishop. But this bishop on E5 is attacked, the queen is putting pressure on the king on E1 actually, and also this bishop is going to soon move and black is going to rapidly castle queenside with a lot of pressure. That's exactly what happens. The bishop falls back to B2 and now knight B4 with a huge threat. Of course, an engine is not going to miss the threat, but a human white might well not notice that knight D3 mate was a threat in this position. Instead, after knight to B4, we see the move pawn to E3, which does stop the threatened smothered mate. And now bishop F5, threatening knight C2 check. Knight to A3 is virtually forced in response, and now castles. At this point, Stockfish is basically developed with the queen, the bishop, the knight. These pieces aren't in yet, but they will be in soon. There's certainly a lot of pressure here, and the idea of knight D3 check is very strong. One response, and maybe the best response, would be D4, expanding in the middle of the board and stopping knight to D3 check. After queen G5, Stockfish has really good compensation, but it's not clear that black is winning or anything like that. Instead though, we see Stoofvlees play the move bishop C3. This is a very human error. It's basically overthinking the position. It comes up with an idea. The idea that if you play knight d3 check now, after a trade here and then knight c4, the knight can make it to b2. For example, f6 and b2, you can chase away this bishop and white is actually okay here. However, just because you have this idea with bishop c3 doesn't mean you can really justify a move that wastes time when your opponent has already sacrificed and has so much pressure. And so in this position, we see knight to d5, creating two very serious threats. Knight takes c3 and queen takes a3. After knight d5, we actually see the losing move. Forced here was knight b5 when black has a really good position, but maybe no win. Instead, after the move bishop b2, stepping back, there is a forced win from Stockfish. Pause your video and see if you can find it. The brilliant and crushing move here is knight takes e3. This knight sacrifice absolutely destroys the white position. There is no defense. However, Stockfish still needs some beautiful and instructive moves to finish things off. Now, the knight sacrifice must be accepted. If you try to grovel with queen e2, then the queen trade will not save you. The bishop is going to hop into d3, and after the attacked rook moves, there is bishop c5. A rook is going to reach the e-file with devastating effect. So after knight takes e3, we do see the acceptance of the knight sacrifice, and the idea is queen h4 check, and the king cannot go to e2 because of mate in 1 with bishop g4. So after queen h4, we see g3, and then queen to e4. The rook on h1 is attacked and only has the g1 square. Now bishop b4 developing with two threats. The threat to capture on d2 with either the bishop or the rook, and the threat to capture on e3. Only one move defends both squares. That is the move knight to c4. In this position, pause your video again to try and play like Stockfish and like Paul Morphy. In this position, Stockfish plays the brilliant Rook takes d2. This move vividly recalls Paul Morphy's great Rook takes d7 from the opera game. In fact, throughout this game, I find Stockfish's play reminiscent of Morphy's. It is sacrificial, open, and natural attacking play. After Rook takes d2, we see Knight takes d2, and just like Morphy, Stockfish takes the time to bring in the other rook, Rook to d8. There are now two threats, a threat on d2 and also a threat of Queen takes e3 and Queen takes g2. The only way to defend both threats is Rook to g2 here. Now, after Queen takes e3, I really feel like the game should have ended with Rook e2. In this position, there is only one winning move. It is the queen sacrifice Rook takes d2 again. After Rook takes e3, there is Rook takes b2 with a monstrous discovered check. The only way to get out of the check ultimately is to give back the queen on d2. After Bishop takes d2 and then Bishop captures e3, Black is winning on material. In the game, we actually saw Bishop e2, but this just allows Black to capture on d2. Now, it might actually look like even though you're going to lose the queen, you might not be doing too badly on material for White, but in fact, Black's queen and the bishops just shred the White position. It's over very quickly. King f1, Rook takes d1, and then Bishop h3, pinning this Rook on g2. There are huge threats here, and it's just desperation from White. Bishop g4, captures on g4, Rook to d8, just giving up a rook in a spite check, and after King takes and Bishop d4, it is actually mate with Queen to e1 and checkmate. This is move 24. To get checkmated for an engine in only 24 moves is nearly unheard of. I really hope that you've enjoyed this game as much as I have. If you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to check out the Opera game in the links that are popping up on your screen right now, and be sure to check out more great games from Stockfish in those same links as well.